tales and songs fall utterly short of your enormity, O Smaug, the Stupendous.
We are the dwarves of Erebor. We have come to reclaim our homeland.
I offer you my help.
How do we know he won't betray us? We don't.
There is no king under the mountain, nor will there ever be.
It will not end here. With every victory, this evil will grow.
Legolas has grown very fond of you. Do not give him hope where there is none.
You have no right to enter that mountain. I have the only right.
We've been blind. In our blindness, our enemy has returned.
I found something in the Goblin tunnels.
What did you find?
My courage.
Good. You'll need it.
Fire and ruin.
That is what you will bring upon us. He cannot see beyond his own desire.
I will not risk this quest for the life of one burglar.
His name was Bilbo.
Thief. Where are you?
Come now. Don't be shy. Step into the light.
Hi everyone and welcome once again to Geek Fest Rants. My name is Carlos Perone, and today we are continuing with an episode we started last week reviewing The Hobbit, The Desolation of Smaug. This is part 2. Last time around, we concentrated mainly with Steve on how good the movie was, on its own primarily, because both of us are more familiar with the film than the book itself. We concentrated mainly on the cinematic aspects of the film and the performances and how the films hold out against each other. This time around, it's going to be a spoiler-heavy episode because I got together with both my friends Mike and Mike, and we delve a little more into the literary part of this film. In other words, how does this film compare to the book? The Mikes are huge fans of all of the Tolkien library, and they have a lot of information to share with us about how the film holds out when you compare it to the original Hobbit book. So join us now as we pick up with my conversation with Mike and Mike. All right, like we said before, there were some elements of the film where if you are familiar with the books, they're definitely switching some things around like they did in the first film. This one apparently even more. Mike, why don't you tell us a little bit about how this particular film deviates from the story and what certain points you think kind of makes a left turn into completely new material that is definitely not found in the books.
Well, the barrel ride is totally different from the book and in the movie. They spiced it up to make, action adventure, obviously bringing in Legolas. Turiel's a brand new character. She never appeared in the book. Legolas was not in The Hobbit at all. He was only Lord of the Rings. I mean, half of the movie was all made up to just add to the excitement and the adventure. And even with the dwarfs, when they were in the mountain and they had that, spoiler alert, giant statue made of gold as it's melting, so it covers Smaug. That was never in the book. I don't remember any of that stuff. So it's changed a lot. So again, it's, to add more things, and I think to expand the movie from 2 movies to 3 movies, since really the book should be done by now. What else you got to add, Mike?
Well, I think the whole thing with Beyond was almost a waste, to tell you the truth, because it was completely different than what the book has. And not to mention even the timing in the book, because I believe the scene with Beyond should have took place real early in the story. It shouldn't be the second part of a trilogy. Actually, it was one of the first adventures after they left the Shire. They pretty much went into boil, if I remember correctly. It was pretty early in the book. And even when they met him, it's totally different. And he was in the book long, but it was like the things he said and the things he did, he was a totally different character. Besides being a giant, man bear, which he was in the book, but the way he acted, other than not liking orcs. He hated orcs, but he never said anything that he hated dwarves too, I believe, in the book either, for that matter. So it was kind of like they changed his character around.
Now, for example, one of those specific scenes you were talking about a few seconds ago was the barrel scene. And you mentioned earlier, off mic when we were talking about how in this movie, this scene is, to me, it was one of the best scenes in the whole movie. And it's a long, I don't want to say drawn out, but it's a very elaborate stage sequence from escaping with those barrels and then going down the rapids with those barrels and all the different fights. But you were telling me, as far as the book goes, how is that described in the book?
It was very simple. It was more of Bilbo got the elves drunk. They passed out, got the keys, freed the dwarves, put them in the barrels, put them in the river, floated down to Lake Town. Adventure's over. None of that, what's happened in the movie, happened in the book at all. It was more of being out in secrecy. Nobody knew how they got out until later on in the movie.
It was just something for the Legolas and Turiel to do, basically, since they were totally not in the book, and Turiel was a totally made-up character by Peter Jackson. Like, she doesn't even appear in Lord of the Rings, she doesn't appear in any of the stories. So, and they're setting up the so-called love triangle between Legolas, Turiel, and Fili.
Now, in spite of these things, how do you guys feel this movie compares with the last one? Is it better, worse? Is it just more of the same? How do you feel about the movie itself?
With the Desolation of Smaug, pacing was much better. The first one was good. I enjoyed it. Just seemed in spots it was kind of slowish. It wasn't moving along. This one seemed to move quicker, faster. It didn't stall too much. It wanted to keep going. Let's keep the story moving, keep the dwarves moving, and things like that. So I'm hoping the third will be the same. But, well, I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Well, even the first part of the book was a little bit slower, as the Lord of the Rings was. It first starts a little slower and builds it up and builds it up. But it's also, like against the spiders, it was mostly Bilbo rescuing the dwarfs only. Because, again, there was no elves really hanging around there. And, there was no Legolas and other elves that fought him with the spiders. Actually, he's the one that only went out there and saved the dwarfs, which I'm glad they had Bilbo at least starting the rescue of the dwarfs. When I saw like the trailers and I saw little scenes, look like that they were going to cut Bilbo out completely. Like it was going, Legolas comes to town and Legolas going to save the dwarfs, which I'm glad at least they had Bilbo, show up and help.
Yeah, just to add on that, I mean, that was the whole point of the books with Bilbo is the book moved on. Bilbo was the one who helped the dwarfs escape the spiders. Bilbo was the one who helped with everything. And yet in the first movie, they kind of took that away. He wasn't becoming the hero. He wasn't the one saving the day. And that's one little change I didn't like too much. I mean, it just showed more of the character of how, again, he had a purpose. He didn't believe he had a purpose in the beginning, but as the book moved on, he realized that he contributed more to the party and to the story than he realized. But in the movies, they're taking it away. Like I said, let's bring in the elves. We need to have Legolas. We need all these fight scenes. And it's really, even when he gets into the treasure trove with Smaug, answers all the questions. In the book, he's the one plays out the riddles. I'm the lucky number. I'm the barrel rider. I'm the something with Sting with the spider slayer. He recounts all the things that he did to help the group. Yet in this movie, they kind of take it away a little bit and trying to point like he needed help on a lot of things. But in reality, he didn't. He was the stronger character, and they're kind of losing that in the first couple of movies. So hopefully by the third movie, they'll turn that around and realize that, he really was important to the group.
Well, that's being said, and I agree with everything you said, but I enjoyed the movies. I really did enjoy the movies. I enjoyed the first movie, I enjoyed the second movie. But it's the same thing with the Harry Potter movies. I enjoyed all the Harry Potter movies, but I'm glad I read the book first. And I'm glad I enjoyed the books first. But like Mike said, Bilbo is the unsung hero throughout the whole book. He did everything, or because he either left up to him, as the dwarves pushed him to do everything. You go fight the dragon out. You get the treasure. You it's like he's just a little hobbit, but he rose to the occasion, you know. So that shows character. That shows, it was mostly like, again, it's Bilbo's story, obviously, but it's like, and I understand it's a movie and there's 13 dwarves and a wizard, and everybody has to have this so-called scene or this, you know, show them in the spotlight, you know, because that's what they have to do. But ultimately, it's Bilbo's story and Bilbo's movie, which I think they're starting to show that in movie 2, and hopefully continues in movie 3.
One of the things I noticed, at least in the movie, was that when we got to the point where we meet the boat captain and he's rescuing them and he's taking them to the town, how important of a character is this? And in the book, does it kind of seem like it slows the story down a little bit? Is it a place to kind of take a beat, take a break from all the action like it felt in the movie? That all of a sudden things are kind of slowing down now once we get into this town.
Bard is a very important character in the story, ultimately. Bard from Lake Town.
Do we meet him about halfway through the story like we have now at this point? We're kind of meeting him halfway through these 3 films, more or less.
I believe so. I believe he came in like in the middle of the book, so to speak. But he had like small parts there, and they leave for a while, and then they go back to him again. But so ultimately, he's a very important character, and you can see why, you know, the 3rd movie, or I hope, if they keep to the general plot. But when they go to Lake Town, like Mike said before, when they're in the almost boring scene after they escape with the barrels down the river without the elves fighting them, they just went down, you know, the river, basically brought them down to Lake Town. They were nailed in the barrels, so it wasn't even like they didn't even see where they were going and the whole bit, you know. And Bilbo's just hanging on top of one of them, floating back and forth, almost getting seasick and the whole bit. That was the big adventure. If he's gonna get seasick, no, that was the whole thing in the book. But they went to Lake Town. They treated him like he was almost at the end part. You know, they cut out that whole part when he was hanging out with Bard's family, his children and stuff. They basically, they invited him, they took the dwarfs in right away, and they said, oh, it's the return of the king of the dwarfs. And the master Lake Town, again, he was a little conniving, and he said, well, oh yeah, be nice to them, and you give them what they want, you know, let them fight the dragon, and the dragon's going to take care of them anyway, so he's going to stay in charge of the Lake Town. So it's like, basically, he just wants to get rid of them, and he figures the dragon's going to do his bidding, so to speak.
Considering that we've already seen special editions for the Lord of the Rings films as far as DVD goes, and they're very substantial material added, this film, because they are purposely stretching the film, you know, they went from 2 films to 3 films, you know, you would imagine that they try not to let anything go. Anything they can get their hands on, they're going to use it in these 3 films. You saw the extended edition. Did it fill in any gaps, or, you know, how does it compare to the Lord of the Rings extended editions?
I'm not exactly sure how much extended they added to it. Like I heard listening to the commentary, they said, okay, this is extended scene, or this was not an original, you know, release. But honestly, I don't think it really added much, because in Lord of the Rings, when they had extended edition, they had like a whole 45 minutes per movie. And this one, I believe, is like 10 minutes if you add it all up. And again, I enjoyed it and everything else. I just bought the extended edition mostly for the behind-the-scenes stuff, because it was like several hours of, you know, behind-the-scenes stuff that I thought it was very, very important, you know, for me being a Hobbit fan, me being a Peter Jackson fan. So I enjoy that probably more than the 10 minutes they added to the movie, so to speak.
Now, let me ask you a question. We're at a point now in the movie where the dragon is coming after the town. Given the fact that we have basically a third of the story still to be told, and the movies is usually, 2.5 hours more, say 2.75 hours, something like this, do you think we are kind of where we should be story-wise, or do you think we have in the next movie a lot of a filler that's going to be added to make this 2.75 hour movie last that long? And let me ask you another question. Like in Lord of the Rings, where we had all these multiple endings, do you think The Hobbit will have all these multiple endings based on the book?
First off, again, spoiler, the end of this movie, you can pretty much tell what's going to happen. There's the Gandalf's been in prison. He's got to get out. Who's going to rescue him? I think it's going to be Radagast the Brown. I think Elrond's going to show up. They're going to have a big wizard duel or something. You've got Fili, Keely, who else was left in Lake Town that was injured, and Turiel. Somehow there's going to be either a battle scene or something. They're going to have to escape the town. Something's going to happen. They're still there, because now all of a sudden the dwarfs are becoming the enemy by the men of Lake Town. It just kind of weird. They hailed them as heroes, but towards the end it seems more like they're villains. Again, then you got Bilbo and Thorin, they're in the mountain. Yeah, they're going to sit and watch Lake Town get destroyed. Smaug's going to die. Now, are we going to have Thrush, the bird, show up to tell Bard the Bowman there's the missing scale? And of course, which we didn't talk about before, was the arrow. In the book was more of it was a big black arrow. This time they created more of a big, long steel. It's got to be fired through like a harpoon. It's not your typical little arrow. Now, once all that happens, after Smaug gets killed, then you have the Battle of the Five Armies. You still have, what was the character's name? The orc that's tracking Thorin. That's got to get resolved. Turiel, does she die? She never made it to Lord of the Rings. We still need to see the deaths of a lot of the dwarves. I think he's going to have this huge battle scene, the same as that we had in Lord of the Rings, where the final battle goes on, and maybe you're not going to see giant elephants or oliphants, but something's going to happen. And is it filler? It could be, but I think what he's going to do is just stretch out the battle scenes, because we know he loves the battle scenes. It's make it a big climax.
Now, speaking of these battle scenes, now, I mentioned before when I was talking to Steve that, to me, this movie so far are a lighter tone than the Lord of the Rings films. Now, I'm not sure if the books are similar in terms of The Hobbit being a lighter tone. This has a lot of comedy and comedic banter between all of the dwarves and stuff. Are we really ready to see a lot of these characters get killed in some shape or form and have some serious battles like they did on Lord of the Rings? Does it fit the tone of this film?
I think you're right. It doesn't, and it shouldn't, because The Hobbit was written, as Tolkien said, was for his grandkids. It was a children's type story. Well, that's why you had a lot of animals and creatures all spoke, yet they changed things around a little bit. Yeah, you have the big battle scene. It's discussed in the book, but I don't remember it being in a lot of detail, because Bilbo gets knocked unconscious, wakes up, and hears the stories about what happened. I have a feeling you're going to actually see what happens. They're going to just fill in the blanks. So the tone, yeah, it's going to be a little different. Plus, you got this love triangle, too, like I forgot to mention before. That's got to get resolved. So I think the tone is going to be a little darker. It's going to be a little more gloomier. Hopefully, Bilbo still comes out as being the hero, and that Thorin forgives him. And that's even another thing which we didn't talk about is how much is Thorin going to go after Bilbo, because he's got the Arkenstone. Because we all know he finds it in Smaug's treasure, but did he keep it? Did he leave it? That's something else that's not really touched on. You're assuming Bilbo has it, or you could assume he didn't take it. So we don't know. But again, I think it is going to be darker. There's too many little plot threads that are out there. And I think Peter Jackson wants to make it a little more serious.
Well, this second movie, as I told Mike and Carlos before, off mic, that I feel it was the most added that the book didn't have. Which, like, again, I enjoyed the movie, I enjoyed the books, but, obviously they added more stuff. So that's how I think it became a trilogy. They added a lot. This part was a lot, I feel, added than, like, part one was. And then the same thing in part 3, as Mike says. If you read the book, most of the, it's building up to a big battle against the dragon, or against anything what happens, consequences after the dragon battle. So, like as Mike says, Bilbo got knocked in the head and he misses most of the battle. Obviously, I don't think they're going to show that. I think Bilbo is going to be, he might get knocked in the head eventually, but they're going to show him fighting, and they're going to show him saving the dwarfs or saving other people, the people, and, he has to be the peacekeeper, and you got to see Thorin, since he seems to be getting more, not drunk with power, but he wants the Arkenstone so bad. He's in the book, he almost goes almost mad for the Arkenstone, so to speak, and it causes complications down the road. So obviously the third part's going to be more interesting, as Mike says, this was built as a children's story. And, it was released as a children's book, and most people that read it was a children that read it. The Lord of the Rings was made, the publishers thought it's going to be another children's story. And then they got it, said, well, it's 1,000 pages, and if you ever read it, it's not a children's story. The complex languages, the complex stories, it was made for adults. And, again, it's like, this is not the children's story The Hobbit was. Again, I think the third part they have enough stuff to put it in, but if you look in the book, from this point, at the end of part 2, it's like there wasn't much left in the book to do. But I feel there's so much they can do, and they could stretch it out for 2.5 hours, a 3-hour movie even. Multiple endings, honestly, I don't think it's going to be as much as it was in Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings, obviously, there was 6 endings in 20, 30 minutes that went on and on and on. I don't see that, honest with you. That's what I feel. I could see what happened to the dwarfs that survived. They might mention that when Bilbo goes home, and then he goes, okay, I'm home now. What am I going to do? And then I'm sure you're going to show Ian home, flash forward to Ian home, and he has to finish up the story and go on from there.
I agree with Mike. I don't think you're going to get an alternate endings or extended endings. I mean, once the Battle of Five Armies is done, and which, by the way, the battle is just for Smaug's treasure. Now everybody wants to lay some claim to the money. Spoiler. But once that happens and you deal with Thoron, and again, does Thoron die? Do we see Fili and Kili, the heroic battle to save and protect their king? I mean, once all that things happen, and Bard the Bowman's supposed to become the leader of the town, Lake Town, what alternate endings can you have? You can't have any alternate endings. Once that's all done and it moves on, Bilbo goes back to Hobbiton. He's got his treasure. He goes back to the Barrow-wights cave, gets that treasure. The story's over. Yes, how are they going to connect it into the Lord of the Rings? Is it him talking about the movie? Are you going to have Gandalf show up? But again, there's not much for alternate endings or multiple endings. I think it's just going to be one thing just to tie it up, to connect all three of the Lord of the Rings movies together. So you can actually sit for 20 hours and watch the story from the beginning all the way to the end. And just to go back, don't get me wrong, I still love the movies. I love watching it. I love the score. Looking forward to the movie. I think they did a great job, and it's just fun to watch it. And it is fun to see what Peter Jackson added to extend it out to 3 movies, which is still amazing that he actually did that. And I guess the next thing he might want to tackle Silmarillion. That should last about 8 movies and really get confusing and bored, and see how he can put Legolas back in, especially when it deals with the history of his family.
Yeah, that would be, can't even think about that right now, because that's just nuts. But thank you, Mike and Mike, for giving us all this extra insight that, you can't really get this stuff just from watching the movies. Sooner or later, if you really, really like these movies, you got to read the books, because that's where it all came from, and that's usually where you can find these little gems that, you've been looking for, basically. It's all in there. You just have to search it out.
Yeah, like speaking of little gems, it's interesting, again, how it's more of a children's book and how things were changed. Like, the spiders were all supposed to speak. Yet, in the movie, again, spoilers, you only kind of hear him speak when he put on the ring. Well, obviously the trolls spoke. Well, Thrush, the bird, even though he knocks, he's supposed to be able to communicate with Bard, the bowman. Are they actually going to do that? So, again, it's always great to read the books and then watch it and compare it. So I think it could be interesting. And I mean, that was always the biggest thing too, is even when Smaug was coming up, is he going to talk? Because again, a lot of other creatures were not talking in Lord of the Rings. And now all of a sudden you got a talking dragon, you got a talking bird, you got talking spiders, talking trolls with English accents, with Bert, Tom, and Bill. So, but definitely you want to read the books, look over the source material, and you can really compare it. But he's still doing a great job. It looks great. Enjoying it. Can't say much more than that.
Thank you again, Michael and Michael. Well, I also like to thank you for joining us today, and hope to see you here soon on another episode of Geek Fest Rants. Bye-bye, everybody.
The Lord of Silver Fountains. The King of Carven Stone. The King beneath the mountain shall come into his own. And the bell shall ring in gladness at the Mountain King's return. But all shall fail in sadness, and the lake will shine and burn. You have no right. No right to enter that mountain. I have the only right. What is this place?
The Desolation of Smaug.
Destroy the dragon. Take back your homeland.
The dwarf will never be king. Our time has come again.
It is not our fight.
not part of this world.
You seek that which would bestow upon you the right to rule. The Arkenstone.
What's that?
That, Master Burglar, is why you are here.
We are in grave danger.
The world is in grave danger. I fear for you.
If this is to end in fire, then we will all burn together.
You can't give up now!
It never ceases to amaze me. The courage of hobbits.
I am king under the mountain.
Whoa. All right, let's do it again.
Stop.